My name is Joni Parsons. I'm founder of Revel 11, and we're so thrilled to have you here today. We have so much just to discuss today. I just want to dive in, and I am just thrilled to have Dr. Judy Ho join us on Revel 11 today. She is a triple board certified and licensed clinical and forensic neuropsychologist and a tenured associate professor at Pepperdine University. She is the author of this fabulous new book called The New Rules of Attachment and another book called Stop Self-Sabotage. She recently did a TED Talk called How Attachment Influences Self-Image, and I highly recommend you spend that time and watch it. We'll put that link in the chat later today. Dr. Judy maintains a private practice in Manhattan Beach, California, where she specializes in comprehensive neuropsychological assessments and expert witness work. Welcome, Dr. Judy. I'm so thrilled to have you and honored.
Oh, thank you so much, Joni. An honor to be here. I'm so delighted to talk to you today and everybody here.
Yes, wonderful. Well, I'm so thrilled with your book. I have dog-eared it, I've underlined it a million times, and I can't wait to go back again and again and repeat a lot of the exercises that you have in there. So let's just dive in and talk about how our childhood impacts who we are today. You have talked about attachment styles and that they are birthed shortly after we are born. So in other words, our caregivers, whether it be mom, grandma, which is what my case was, impact who you are today and how you react to various situations. So let's start there. Like, do we have any control about who we are today? It really goes back to our childhood.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we have a ton of control over who we are today. However, we have to recognize the influences of our past. And it's interesting because the whole idea about understanding your past is not to dwell on traumas and wounds or even blame your caregivers for maybe what they didn't give you, because in most cases, most parents and caregivers were trying to do their best for you, but they had their own struggles. They had their own difficulties, their own attachment wounds, their own intergenerational trauma that they may have inadvertently passed on. But the idea is that these past experiences did shape your worldview, the way that you think about your life, the way you think about yourself, how you relate to others, whether or not you deserve good things. But these attachment wounds is something that you can heal even when you're older, and even when your primary caregivers are either no longer around or not interested in doing the work with you. And that, I think, is the most important message about my book and the work that I have done with my patients around attachment.
Which is such good news for all of us joining in on this event today, and then also for everyone who reads your book to know that you can change those attachment styles around. But let's talk first about what is attachment theory. Like, give us the definition and perhaps some examples as well.
Definitely. So attachment at its most basic level refers to those first crucial bonds that you had with your caregivers. Primary caregivers are defined as the people who were regularly around so that you look to them to meet your needs. And of course, we all come into the world completely helpless. That's the way that mammals are made. And that's why mammalian babies are so adorable. We have to be adorable to try to entice our primary caregivers to not leave us despite all the diaper changes and not sleeping. You know, we entice them to stay around us because we need them for survival. So attachment theory was based on this idea that our primary caregivers have so much to do with how we learn about our place in the world. You know, when we communicate our needs, are they likely to be met? What do people around us do when we say we need something, when we cry, when we express some form of distress? What kind of response are you getting from your environment? And then through this, there are templates that develop in terms of how we tend to behave, especially under stress.
That's so interesting that those experiences form who we are today again and again and again, but there's so many opportunities for change. But let's define each one of these. So secure attachment is about roughly 30% of the population. Is that right?
About 20 to 30%.
20
That's
to
right.
30%. So
Mhm.
define secure attachment and what that looks like.
So secure attachment is a person who generally had caregivers who were around and available. Doesn't mean that they have all the right answers, but that they were consistently available to the person who is asking for a need or expressing a distress. And when that happens, the person develops in a way that is generally self assured. They're pretty confident in themselves, tend to have generally high self esteem,
Mhm.
and they believe they deserve good things in life and that they will be able to create the actions in their life to produce those good outcomes for themselves.
I've met a couple of those people, and but there's three more attachment theory examples, and that make up about 70 to 75% of the population. Let's start with avoidant.
Yeah. So the avoidant personality, the avoidant attachment type is somebody who perhaps had caregivers who maybe were a bit absent-minded or asked them to step up much more quickly to an adult responsibility. Maybe these individuals also were learning at an early age that a lot of the support around them comes from them being achievers, being the star child of the family. So as they get older, they tend to rely only on themselves. They don't trust other people to be there for them. They tend to be very achievement oriented because they don't think that investing in relationships is really going to be a helpful avenue. And when they're stressed, they tend to isolate.
Wow. And then, how about anxious?
Yeah, the anxiously attached person generally has been exposed to a childhood where their parents were oftentimes stressed out about their own issues. Maybe their parents seemed emotionally very anxious and like they didn't have good coping skills when things came up. It was largely inconsistent. Sometimes their parents would be very attentive, other times they would be maybe way too overprotective, not in a good way. And then other times they just seemed like they were completely distracted and not really able to be there for their children. So, through that kind of inconsistency, anxiously attached individuals learn that they need to always check in with the people around them. Are we still okay? Are you still here for me? Do you still
Mhm.
love me? And over time, as adults, they develop into these individuals who need more reassurance than the average person to know that they're okay. Their self esteem is predicated on how their relationships are going, oftentimes. And they may have some difficulties with self starting, self initiation, and they're also more prone to codependency, rescuing other people because they think that by helping other people, maybe they can keep those people close to them and to support them as well.
So if this is so interesting. And then the disorganized attachment theory.
Disorganized attachment is probably the most misunderstood out of all the attachment styles. I think a lot of people think that disorganized attachment means that you're some combination of the anxious and avoidant attached. And actually, if you're a combination, you're a combination. Uh, Not everybody fits neatly into one of the four boxes. And so I think that there are certain dimensions, or some people will say, well, I'm pretty securely attached most of the time. But when it comes to romantic relationships, that's where my insecure attachment shows up. And I'm kind of anxiously attached in those arenas. That's very common. Disorganized is actually its completely own attachment style. I think it's characterized by this feeling of chaos and emotional dysregulation all the time. People with disorganized attachment when they were children were oftentimes exposed to a lot of chaos. Maybe they were even exposed to abuse, either inside their home or outside their home. As a result, their nervous system is constantly dysregulated. They're constantly in fight or flight. And that's what it feels like for an adult with disorganized attachment. They look like they might be hot or cold, but it's because alarm bells are constantly going off and they're trying to shift their strategy in order to survive. Sometimes when things are too calm, they get really anxious because they've never achieved calm before for long periods of time. So inadvertently, they might draw to chaos. They may actually create some self-fulfilling prophecies where maybe a good relationship gets ruined because they keep questioning or testing the person. Are you really there for me? Do you really
Mhm.
love me? And that obviously then exhausts the person that they're in a relationship with. And so it makes it a lot harder for the disorganized person also to reach bigger goals because they're constantly looking over their shoulder. And so when you're in a survival mode, you can't really be at the same time in a thriving mode.
So let's talk to our audience and ask them if they have felt any attachment to any of these definitions. So do you feel secure, avoidant, anxious, disorganized? I feel like, I was kind of, I related to avoidant and secure, kind of a little combination of both of those. So if you want to put in the chat, you don't have to, but it's always nice to see where people are. So once you understand who you are, Dr. Judy. Like, tell us, like, what are the benefits of understanding this attachment theory and how we can start looking at ourselves, really deeply and, to have some self nurturing around, that we didn't have. I mean, we're reacting to how we were raised.
Exactly. And all of us, I don't think anybody can say that they had a perfect childhood. I don't think that anyone can say that. And I don't think that that would be realistic. But reflecting on your attachment styles is important because it does form your worldview. It forms the way that you talk about yourself and to yourself. It forms your foundational self-talk and your foundational core beliefs. And so that's why it's so important that we take a look at that and we think about ways in which we can restructure and transform the thoughts that aren't working for us.
Which is wonderful. So we talked about in your TED Talk, you gave such an amazing discussion about how we do negative self-talk within each of these attachment theories. Can you talk about the negative self-talk and how we start to look at things differently once we recognize those? And your video just went off.
Yeah, so I'm sorry. I had to turn off my video because my toddler ran into my office.
Oh, well, we'd
So
love
just
to
one
meet your
second while we
toddler.
try to get this. I know it's like he really like speaking of attachment. Okay. But yeah, a lot of times I do some of my workshops, et cetera, from my home office, but that's one piece of the complication that can come up. So can you just repeat the last part of your question, Joni, so I can make sure I'm
Of
answering
course,
it?
I was just saying that in your TED Talk, you did such a beautiful, you talked about how we are so um, aware. So we're not aware of our attachment theory, but the negative self-talk that comes with this attachment theory is really important to recognize. And I know I live in negative self-talk, most of the day sometimes, which I think a lot of people would be surprised by, but it's constant. It's these constant thoughts that we embrace that aren't necessarily true. And I thought that was interesting in your TED Talk that you said about we have 6,200 negative thoughts a day. Is that accurate?
Oh, we have 6,200 thought worms a day. So thought worms are actually
Worms.
chains of thoughts that people have about a specific topic. So in terms of actual thoughts, it's probably somewhere between tens of thousands, anywhere from 15,000 to 65,000 from all the different studies that have been done. But
Crazy.
what I thought was interesting is that there were, on average, about 6,200 thought worms, which means that it's these repeated thoughts about a specific topic. So to me, that really speaks to ruminations, right? Like when you have a disastrous thought in your head, a negative thought in your head, and then you just keep pontificating on those thoughts over and over again. Like, okay, and then what if this happens? What if that happens? So there's 6,200 of those independent ones. They may not all be negative, but I would say that probably the overwhelming majority of those thoughts are negative. Because how many times do we really ruminate and create thought chains about positive thoughts? I mean, I think it's very few, right?
Yeah,
Because we don't really pay
exactly.
attention to them. Yeah.
No. And why is it human nature to concentrate more on the negative than the positive, Dr. Judy?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we all do it. It's universal. So there's two things that are really important to keep in mind. One is that uh, it's survival. It's an evolutionary adaptation that maybe sometimes gets turned on its head. So we do have to think about the negative potential outcomes because we're trying to avoid them so that we can survive. And so your mind is already geared towards focusing more on potential threats in your environment. But I think that sometimes our minds go overboard. And I also would say that the people who survived those early days where we truly did have to be much more attuned to our environment because you could be eaten by a saber-toothed tiger at any
Right.
moment. The genes that survived in our actual ancestors who passed their personality traits and their behaviors down to us are not the people who were doing mindfulness activities out in the wild, right? I mean, they got eaten. So they're no longer, their genes did not get passed down. The genes that got passed down were the worried Nellies, right? These are the people who are darting back and forth, like, are we okay? Oh my gosh, like we're going to go hide behind a tree because we heard a noise. Those are the ones who actually did ultimately survive. And we have their genes and we have their brains. And so be compassionate to yourself when you think, oh, how come my negative thoughts are going off all the time? It actually is your brain trying to protect you, but maybe it's being too overprotective and it's starting to get in the way of a better life for you.
So that negative self-talk, is that your inner child talking to you? Is that young adolescent that had all these experiences, like kind of going, this is how I'm going to deal with this. This is how I grew up. This is what I was thinking about. So how do we start to reparent that inner child that is giving us all those negative thoughts?
Yeah. Well, first of all, yes, part of your inner child is always talking to you. It's just how much
Mhm.
you're wanting to acknowledge them. Sometimes you're like, you're being very inconvenient right now. I don't really want to think about those things or those terrible ideas or thoughts. And I think that it is important to acknowledge that a lot of times those negative thoughts come from a place where you were disappointed in your past. And that's why you are having the reaction that you are today to certain triggers and to certain situations, because perhaps they remind you of certain things that did happen in your past. But I also want to say that, a lot of times we feel like as adults, we have to shove down those ideas that come
Mhm.
from our inner child wounds because we think, well, nobody wants to hear that, or that seems immature, or that seems petty. Or in the past, when I've communicated that this is how I felt, I wasn't met with the response I wanted. And so there's also this other element of us stuffing down our feelings and stuffing down our thoughts that we think might not be palatable to the people that we're interacting with or in our modern world. And that actually makes your inner child feel even more invalidated. And at the same time, continue to drive those same negative beliefs over and over again because you're not giving yourself a opportunity to disprove them. So like one example would be if you believe that no one's going to come to your aid, you're also more likely to not ask anybody for help. So then
Exactly.
there's nobody who could come to your aid and actually say, hey, maybe you were wrong about this, right? And so then that continues to percolate in your brain as like, well, no one wants to help me. But when you really think about it, you didn't give them any opportunity to. And that's why these pre-existing beliefs continue.
So is that a self-fulfilling prophecy that we do
Yes.
to ourselves?
Yes, exactly. And our brains, I think, are much more comfortable with confirming pre-existing ideas
Mhm.
than challenging a new and incorporating a new idea into our worldview. And the reason is we do thrive on consistency and patterns. As a general rule, most human beings, change is not ultra comfortable for them. And that's because the more we know about our environment, the more our odds of survival. So, generally, we kind of want things to stay the same, generally, right? That's kind of a general rule of thumb.
It's more
And
comfortable.
it's more comfortable. And that's why
Mhm.
sometimes people are drawn to chaos or even, for example, abusive relationships when they've had some in the past, because at least they know that they were able to survive it. So they kind of know how to manage that. And so it's not always conscious, but it happens for that reason. There's this feeling of comfortability and routine and knowing some situation rather than being put in a completely new situation. And so when we get new information, the automatic way our brain likes to process it is to try to explain it within your pre-existing worldview. So let's say somebody was helpful. Maybe you didn't ask them, but they still helped you anyway. Well, if you had a pre-existing worldview that people can't be counted on, the first thing your brain is likely to think is not, oh, wow, so and so helped me. Maybe I was wrong in thinking that nobody wants to help me. No, the first thing that your brain is likely to think is, what do they want? Like, they must want something from me. Like, I'm going to wait
Isn't that
until the other
interesting?
shoe drops. Yeah.
Wow. So you have so many amazing exercises in your book, The New Rules of Attachment. I thought would be nice to do a couple here today in our mini workshop. And so let's start with a visualization for the inner child, and I'll just pass that over to you.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think that it's really helpful again for us to really be in touch and ask for input from our inner child because there's wisdom in your inner child. And I think that sometimes we don't acknowledge that because we think, okay, inner child, these are like my childish ideas and childish beliefs. And yet it's really important to stay in touch with your inner child because it's where some of your most prominent worldviews were formed, right? And we want to know where they come from. And we also want to let your inner child know that it's okay. Like it's okay to have feelings and to express them, because that will help you to actualize as into your full self as the adult that you are. So, what I'd like us to do is to Start by taking a couple of deep breaths and just get in a comfortable position where you are and plant your feet on the ground. And just take a few deep breaths, inhaling through your nose slowly and then exhaling through your mouth. Just be attentive to where your body might feel stress and let your body relax with each breath that you're taking. Now, I would like you to imagine a place where you feel completely safe and comfortable. This could be a real place that you know in life or a purely imaginary sanctuary. And fill this space with things that make you feel secure and at peace. Elements of nature, maybe some of your favorite objects, colors, or sounds. And spend a few moments now really immersing yourself in the details of this safe place. Now, in this safe place, envision a child version of yourself. Picture this child in as much detail as possible. It can be any age during your life that you'd like. And just give as much detail as you can in terms of what you used to look like, how old you are, what you're wearing, and just take some time to fill in these details. And now imagine your adult self as you are today, walking into the scene and approaching your inner child. Introduce yourself. It can be something just like, "Hi, I'm the adult version of you," or "I'm the you now." And let your inner child know that you're there to listen and support them. Ask your inner child how they're feeling right now and if there's anything they want to share with you. Just take a few moments now, be patient and open to whatever comes up without judgment. And let your inner child know that it's okay to feel whatever they're feeling and whatever they've communicated with you. Offer them love, understanding, and comfort. If it feels right, you can imagine yourself patting your inner child on the back or giving your inner child a hug. Just reassure them, either verbally or physically, that you're here to protect and take care of them. Now imagine giving your inner child a gift that symbolizes your love and care for them. It could be a toy, a blanket, a flower, anything that feels meaningful. And just observe how your inner child reacts to this gift. And tell your inner child that you'll always be there for them, that they can come to you whenever they need support, and that they simply need to call on you whenever they want to chat with you again. Now, slowly bring your awareness back to the present moment by paying attention to your breath once again. Take a few deep cleansing breaths, breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth, and gently open your eyes.
That was beautiful. Thank you. I want to know how that was for you in our audience today. If you want to share in the chat. Ugly cried. I have a lump in my throat.
Hmm.
Mm.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing. It is really an emotional experience to do that. That was unexpectedly powerful, too intense for my office. But Julie, I recommend you do that later. um,
Mm,
Thank you for sharing. It was okay, hard to stay consistent in the moment at times, of course.
yep.
And Richard, I'm glad your late son joined you.
Mhm.
Thank you all for sharing so much. That was a lovely gift. Thank you, Dr. Judy. We also wanted to talk about two other exercises, identifying thoughts and transferring. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah. So I was just responding in the chat just now about how it can really be helpful to do this exercise in your own quiet time or even record yourself saying the script and following it. So, Joni, if it's helpful to your audience, I can send just like a text, like a Word document version of the script, and you can send it to the people who were here today if they wanted
I
to
would love
try it
that. Thank
themselves on
you.
their own time. Sometimes that can be
Thank
more
you so much.
helpful, yeah, when they don't feel like they're slightly being watched on on
Right,
a
I know.
workshop.
I know,
Yeah,
and it's noon, and I know some people are at lunch right now, and so we would appreciate that very much, and I'll send that out when we send out the video that will be on our YouTube channel as well.
perfect. Okay, Joni. And so returning to your question, what were you saying about the next
So
exercise?
returning to our question is identifying thoughts and the transferring exercise. I think that that would be very helpful after this experience.
Yeah. So, thought identification. First of all, we all have so many different thoughts all throughout the day, and we don't always pay attention to it, but we tend to notice when we have a negative emotion or when we do something that we wish we didn't do. And then we get really upset about that. And then, of course, then we have more thoughts about it, which then makes you more upset and maybe do other things that you wish you didn't, do again. So it is really important to slow down and rewind the tape, essentially. So when you notice a negative thought or negative behavior, ask yourself this very simple question, which is, what was I thinking just before I noticed this feeling or noticed this action I wish I didn't do? So I'd like to invite all of you guys now to just think back to maybe like the last 24 hours or maybe the last 48 hours and recall a moment where you noticed a negative feeling that you didn't like, or you did something that you're like, oh man, why did I do that? In retrospect.
Mhm.
And after you identify that feeling or behavior, I want you to rewind and ask yourself, what was I thinking just before noticing this? And I'd love for anybody who felt comfortable to share what maybe that thought was, or even just the component of that thought, like, oh, I
Yeah,
was
that
beating
would be
myself up.
lovely.
Yeah, that would be
Yes.
really, really helpful.
I always beat myself up while we're waiting for somebody. It's been, I grew up as a heavy child, and that heavy child came up in my visualization. And, I still fight that as, at this time in my life that, that little kid never goes away. And so, anyway, that's my negative, constant repeating patterning thought is
Yeah.
of being a fat little kid. But let's see, regret for not speaking up. So
Hmm.
Laura Lee, that's something that she regrets on a regular basis.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Um, some other common things as you guys are, whether you're going to be sharing or just doing this exercise quietly to yourselves, there tends to be several different categories of thoughts that we tend to have, negative thoughts that lead to negative feelings and negative behaviors. And they tend to be in the categories of catastrophizing, basically thinking that everything's just going to end up like in the worst outcome possible. Um, and the second category would be discounting the positive, like even though positive things are happening or you've done positive things, you're discounting them like, well, that doesn't matter. Those are not big deals, but making much bigger deal out of negative issues. Um, there's also the shoulds, which is beating yourself up for something that you think you should have done. I see that already in some of these
Yeah.
thoughts here. But
Mhm.
also, I think the trick to that though is that the bar keeps moving. So like one day, you feel like you didn't get enough done, and the next day you got a lot done, but you still feel like you didn't get enough done. Like there's just still that vague
Our
feeling you just
mind
didn't,
is just
yeah,
so strong.
meet your own standard, but your standard keeps moving too. It's not really a defined bar. There's also black and white thinking, where going back on a difficult time, or even just a difficult interaction with somebody, uh, just going right to the extreme instead of being able to live in the grays. Um, well, I'm just never going to talk to this person again, or like, I knew nobody would ever be there for me, kind of just very, very extreme thinking. There's also mind reading, which means that you're assuming you know what somebody else thinks, even though you haven't really checked in with them. Like, oh, I knew that this relationship wasn't going to last, or I knew that sooner or later they would fall out of love with me, those kinds of thoughts. And then the last one is comparisons, comparing yourself to other people and feeling like you don't measure up somehow. Like, well, if only I was more like so and so, my life would be better. Right.
Yes.
Um, so a lot of people will have negative thoughts in all of these different categories. Some people might have thoughts only in a couple of these categories. It's just important to identify the general uh, form of your negative thoughts. And so I would invite you guys to keep collecting this data, like I just asked you to do. Next time you notice a negative feeling or a negative action, rewinding in the tape and saying, okay, what was I thinking just before? Writing some of them down. And over the course of a week, you're going to see the kind of patterns that emerge. And you're going to say, aha, like I'm somebody who regularly engages in black and white thinking and shoulds. You'll know which of these categories apply to you most. And then it's really important to start applying strategies to create more balanced thinking that actually reflects your life and the situation that you're in. So the first step to that is just to start questioning your thoughts. Your thoughts are not the truth. Um, you have over 50 to 60,000 independent thoughts in a day. They can't all be true. But the way that language works is that we automatically do think it's true or that it's going to come true. So just reminding yourself that thoughts are not necessarily the truth and actually starting to question yourself in a very systematic way. So take out a piece of paper, write down your negative thought at the top, and then write in 2 columns evidence for and evidence against. And then actually challenge yourself to list actual evidence that this thought is true. So that does not mean more thoughts, because that could just be more interpretations. But it's actually like if somebody was actually in the room, could they verify that this happened or it didn't? Right. Um, so for example, if your negative thought is, I'm never going to get a better job, what's the thoughts? What is the evidence for? It's not just more thoughts about how you can't get a better job. It's actual evidence like, okay, I've applied for 3 promotions and I didn't get any of them. Okay, that's actual evidence that another independent person could verify, right? But also then ask yourself, well, what's the evidence against? And the evidence against might be, well, I got a really great performance review this last cycle.
Mhm.
So maybe that means it's going to lead to better opportunities in this company, right? Um, most of the times people are going to find that there's things in both columns. It's never really just one-sided like we think in our heads. And that's really important for the second step. The second step is to create a new thought that you can actually believe in, a realistic thought. And so sometimes these positive mantras don't work because they don't really fit your feelings and they don't really fit your situation, right? But the idea of modifying your thoughts in a realistic way is to actually recognize both sides of the situation. So I like to use what I call the yes, but technique. So, yes, fill in the blank with something that isn't going well, but fill in the blank with something that's either in progress or is going well. Yes, I haven't been able to get a promotion, but I just got a great performance review. I'm about to take this new certification class, and I believe that's going to concretely lead to new opportunities. And so it's really important that your thinking is realistic and balanced rather than just this blanket positivity, which sometimes doesn't work because it doesn't actually fit what's happening.
Dr. Judy, that is such a wonderful exercise that we can all use again and again. So thank you for having being for us to be able to put that into our toolbox. So now I want to talk about, we've talked about so much already, but let's talk about how to heal each attachment style. And again, to remember that it's never too late to change these attachment styles so you can get closer and closer to a secure attachment style. So, do you want to start with avoidant first?
Yeah, the avoidant attached person tends to put too much emphasis in their ability to achieve, and they tend to put a lot less stock into the relationships that they have with people. They also really have a hard time reaching out for support. As I mentioned, it's really, really difficult for them to admit weakness because they feel like people are going to judge them in different ways. Um, and so I think what's really helpful for people who are avoidantly attached would be to essentially, really lean in more on the people that they could truly rely on or want to cultivate better and deeper relationships with. And so this exercise that I developed is one that's called the closeness circle. It's used to understand the degree of connection and intimacy you have with people in your life. And it's helpful to identify any challenging patterns in relationships and also how you can create and maintain strong connections. So, to start, take a piece of paper or open your journal and draw a small circle in the middle of your paper and write your name in it. And then draw three concentric circles around it, like the rings on a tree, with enough space to write in between them. So moving outward from the circle with your name in it, the next ring would be the anchor. This represents the people in your life with whom you trust the most and feel closest to. When you're with these people, you would consider letting your guard down and feel that you can be vulnerable with them. So write down any names of people whom you feel fits this description. And be honest about it. If family members don't really fit into it, you don't have to write them down, even though you feel like, oh, maybe I should. It's like, let's dispose with the shoulds and just do what you feel is most congruent with your experience right now. And the next ring is called the buoy. So just kind of like the buoys that you would find around an ocean, these people are reliable, but they might be moving around a bit. They're important to you, but they may not be as secure and grounded a source of support as your anchors. So these might be friends, colleagues with whom you're in regular contact with, people who you're likely to go to for advice some of the time. So go ahead and fill in some names that fit this description.
So the circle here in the book, but
Yeah,
here we go.
thank you. So the circles, I see Celine had a question. The circles are boat, um, buoy, and anchors from outside in.
Yeah, so maybe you can try to see if you can see that. Okay,
I just typed it into the chat so that that can help.
thank you.
Okay. And the last ring is called the boat. These are people who you can rely on for companionship or entertainment, but may not be the first people you go to when you need to solve a problem or when you need to talk about something that is more personal. These people might be those who you spend time with or share hobbies because you enjoy their company, and doing so is relatively convenient, like neighbors and colleagues. So take some time to fill that in. Hey, so now that you've written this down, the closeness circle is a starting point in assessing the connections in your life. So you don't need to fit in everyone you know into these categories, but work on this over the next few days if you'd like, until you feel like it captures your social interactions adequately. And after you've completed the closeness circle, some things that you can do is to examine it for certain patterns. Like, are you leaning into your social supports when you actually need to? Is there anyone missing from these rings that seems really blatant? And if so, why weren't they included? Have there been relationships that have changed with time or circumstance? Maybe a friend moved from an anchor to a boat. And how do you
Mhm.
feel about this change? Um, is there anything you wish you can change in your closeness circle? Any specific relationships you want to improve? Um, and I think really the next step after asking yourself some of these questions is to really reach out to at least one of these people in any area um, of these rings and make a commitment to try to deepen that development with them. It could be, well, there's this person who is in my boat, but I kind of want to move them closer to maybe a buoy or an anchor. So I'm going to reach out and spend a little bit more time with them and try to cultivate that relationship. This is a helpful exercise, I think, for every attachment type, but especially
Absolutely.
for avoidantly attached people. They just don't take the time
Mhm.
to really think about it in this way, usually. And so, while I think it is important for everybody to do this kind of exercise, it is probably most helpful for people with avoidant attachment.
That is wonderful, and thank you for this. This is a real gift. It's something I've been thinking about a lot. And so how about anxious attachment?
So anxious attachment tends to have real difficulties with codependency and not taking care of themselves. And that's why I think that for the most part, they tend to neglect their self-care. There really isn't a systematic way that they go through self-care practices. So one thing that could be really helpful is for people with insecure anxious attachment to really think about making their self care as systematic as possible. So, one way to do this is right now we're going to brainstorm 6 different forms of self care. And I want to challenge you to come up with 2 activities for each of these categories. So, emotional self care are activities that help you connect, process, express, and reflect on a full range of emotions. Writing a journal, creating art, playing music, dancing, working with a therapist, all of these would be emotional self care. So go ahead and just take a few seconds now to jot down a couple of activities in this area. Okay, and now let's go to social self care. These are activities that nurture relationships and help you feel connected with others. Examples include calling a friend, having lunch with a family member, helping a neighbor with a chore, joining a club, or attending a get together. So just write down a couple of activities that fit into this category. Now let's think about mental self care. So these are activities that stimulate your mind or add to your skill sets. Examples include reading a book, going to a museum, solving a puzzle, learning something new, or practicing a new hobby. Okay. And let's go to practical self care next. These are tasks that you complete that fulfill the core aspects of your life to prevent stressful situations. Examples include washing the dishes, brushing your teeth, taking a shower, creating and managing your budget,
Basics.
even doing your laundry, which I'm going to do this evening. Actually makes me feel very at peace when I have clean clothes. So,
I agree. Yeah,
yeah,
and sometimes the most basic things are the hardest to get done, and they feel the
exactly.
best when you do it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, and physical self care. So these are activities that improve your physical being, like taking a walk, sleeping well, staying hydrated throughout the day, eating a healthy diet, stretching, other forms of exercise, getting a haircut, or going to the doctor.
These are about self-care, and it's such a beautiful reminder that we need to do this on a regular basis.
Oh, for sure. And then the
Mhm.
last category is spiritual self care. So these are activities that nurture your spirit and help you think about things bigger than yourself. Examples include meditation, yoga, spending time in nature, going to a place of worship, practicing gratitude, or reflecting on your values.
Wonderful. Tremendous list. Okay, let's talk about the last one, disorganized attachment.
Yeah. So before we moved on to disorganized attachment very quickly, what you're going to do now with this list is try to do one activity every day, rotating among the 6 areas. So you could do like a mental Monday, social Tuesday, etc. And then on Sunday, just repeat one of the self-care categories that you think you need the most or that you enjoyed the most from that week. And I would also remind yourself to rate your level of enjoyment after doing the activity on a scale of 1 to 5. Anything that's below a 3, 5 being like the most enjoyment, 1 being no enjoyment at all. Anything below a 3, you should just throw out. Don't force yourself into a form of self care just because your neighbor's doing it, your friend is doing it, and it works for them, right? So continue to refresh this list after you've gone through it and make sure that you're doing something, however small, every day. Um, as you're making this list, I hope that you've written things down that you can do within 5 minutes or even just drinking water throughout the day. That's just a reminder, right? It's not so much about um, setting aside hours and hours to do self-care. That's not what self-care is about. It's about being intentional with each action and making sure
Mhm.
that it's regular.
And I love throwing out the ones below 3 so that you're really focusing on the things that you enjoy most and living in your passion and your purpose. So that's fabulous. Now let's talk about disorganized attachment.
Okay,
And
perfect.
we
All
have
right.
about 3 minutes for this one.
Yeah, so we're going to go quick on this one. Disorganized attachment, there's lots of different ways to heal, but I think one thing that's helpful to help them calm their dysregulated nervous system is to do some vagus nerve stimulation exercises. So, vagus nerve plays a really important role in relaxation. It's the longest cranial nerve in your body. It connects your brainstem to your internal organs and helps you to remain calm even under stress. So you can train your vagus nerve just like the way that you would train aspects of your physical body. Here's a couple of my favorite techniques. One is just cold water immersion. A change in temperature can help make the switch from the sympathetic nervous system to the parasympathetic nervous system, which is relaxation system. So just, put your face in a bowl of ice water for a few seconds after this workshop, put an ice pack on your neck for a minute or two, or switch the temperature to cold for the last 30 seconds of your shower. All of those things would be examples of cold water immersion.
So
Humming or singing.
before you continue, we had somebody just ask, could you repeat that term Vegas?
Oh, it's vagus nerve, Vagus.
Okay, thank you.
There we go. Yep, vagus nerve. Okay. And so there we go. All right. So the other really easy technique is actually humming or singing. So, because your vagus nerve is connected to your vocal cords, humming, singing to your favorite tunes, or making a voo sound like this, voo. When you feel the vibration here, you're actually vibrating your vagus nerve, and that positively impacts your vagal tone. And so, as a bonus, singing increases oxytocin, regardless of whether or not you're a good singer. So, don't judge yourself. have fun singing in the shower. um, and then the vagus nerve can also be stimulated by massaging specific areas of your body. So even a self massage on the palms of your hands for a minute or two, that
Mhm.
can stimulate your vagus nerve as well. So next time you're feeling dysregulated, nervous, anxious, try any of these quick techniques.
That's terrific. Okay, anything else about the disorganized attachment?
Well, I think that there's going to be a lot of different techniques, like the empty chair exercise, like mirror work that can really help to heal the disorganized attached style, especially. And you can check into my social media, my website, and of course, my book to look at some of these more detailed techniques when you have more time.
Yes, and Dr. Judy, this has been so lovely to have the time with you to go through a lot of these exercises. They're so meaningful, and it is a reminder that we can look at ourselves and make that commitment to ourselves to take the time for healing. And I wanted to end our conversation today with some reparenting. How do we reparent that inner child? And maybe you can pick out your top five. I have the whole list here in front of me, but what are your top five ways to adopt us, that understanding of how to reparent yourself as a beginning?
Yeah. So reparenting is actually a very simple and concrete practice where basically you allow your adult self to meet the needs of your inner child, which is what we started this whole conversation about. And I'll just say that every single time that you set healthy boundaries to protect your well being, that's a form of reparenting. So think about the kind of boundaries you need to set in the different areas of your life. Each time you listen to your inner child, just like the activity we did earlier today, and validate their emotions and what they're thinking, that's a form of reparenting. Every time you practice self compassion, forgive yourself for past mistakes and release expectations of perfection, that's reparenting. Each time you consciously engage in self care, like we just talked about, that's a form of reparenting. And every time you allow your activities and your decisions to be guided by your top values, what you find the most important to you to be able to embody in your life, that's a form of reparenting. And so I would just challenge you to think about these five things, boundaries, listening to your inner child, practicing self compassion, engaging in intentional self care, and living your life according to your top values. Challenge
Mhm.
yourself to do this in some way every single day of your life. And you're going to feel like that inner child is healing from the inside out.
And I'm just going to add my favorite one is that you are deserving of love and belonging. And I want to invite everyone in our audience to know that you are deserving of love and belonging. And in wrapping up today's conversation, Judy, is there something that you would like to impart on everyone as they go back into their lives today at 1 o'clock on this summer solstice?
Well, I would say that it's so important to acknowledge that you can adopt the self talk of the securely attached person at any point in your life. And whenever you do need some affirmations that are realistic and can help you to cultivate this belief in yourself, try some of these statements on for size. Pick one of these four statements and make that your mantra for today. Whatever one you think speaks most to you or that you might need to draw from the most. So these are the kinds of self statements that people with secure attachment are more likely to say to themselves on a daily basis. I believe in and like myself. I can handle what comes my way. I can affect positive outcomes in my life. And I can be independent and rely on others too.
And this list and many others are on Dr. Judy's TED Talk, which is in the chat. I just want to say that this book has been so meaningful to me and will continue to be as I go through it and do additional exercises, some on a daily basis. And Judy, I want to thank you for writing this book. You are going to help so many people like really deal with struggles that they've had in their life and to know that they can have a fresh start. So thank you so much for your time today. And if you want to stay in touch with Judy, you can by signing up for her newsletter on drjudyho.com. And then she's going to have a LinkedIn Live at the end of July. Do you want to talk to us about that a little bit?
Yeah, so follow me on LinkedIn, or you can follow me on any of my social media accounts. We'll make sure to be promoting it. But either in the third or the fourth week of July, I'm going to have a LinkedIn Live where we go through different practices for enhancing your well-being and your resilience. And also, we'll be doing a live Q&A. So I'll have more details about that. You can also sign up for my newsletter, which is accessible from my social media websites, as well as my actual website at drjudyho.com. And you'll be sure to get all of the free resources that I offer through there, as well as updates about any events like that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time today and imparting all of your wisdom on us. And